Yeah, thank you very much, Ran, and hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. As Ran said, my name is Klugow. I'm a project manager and product owner at MM1. And yes, I've been working for corporate clients in the mobility and finance industry to develop new products and services for more than 5 years now. And as my role is usually defined, I work at the interface between the development teams, so the experts, and the responsible management of our clients. And since 2018, the way I work and the way the development teams work changed due to the impact that the general data privacy regulation from the European Union has given to us. Since then, we are frequently confronted with news like you see on the next slide that you have probably seen a minute ago as well. What you see here is a collection of newspaper headlines that were published within the last 2 years and that describe that again, a company was fined for violating the General Data Privacy Regulation, or short, the GDPR. These examples demonstrate that there is a large gap between regulators' expectations on data privacy within corporates and the way the companies actually comply to the GDPR. In our projects, we are trying to close this gap by educating the management and the IT teams in these following areas that you see here. And today, I want to share some of these aspects with you and how it might affect, and want to talk you through how it might affect your business operations. My goal is to leave you with the basic ideas of that regulation and deliver the mindset of the law to you, rather than going into too much detail on every single aspect. And unfortunately, we cannot go through all of them. You see here, however, I will have a short deep dive on 5 highlighted areas. Next slide, please. I will tell you the basic GDPR know-how everyone in your team should understand, the technical organizational initiatives you need to undertake in order to comply to that law, the challenges that exists with cross-border data transfers nowadays. Then I will give you 3 examples of failures for which companies were fined for. And eventually I will provide you with a recommendation what to do in case of a data breach. So let's begin. Why is this law in place? With the growth of digital services within the last 20 years, there has also been a growing interest in data. Having access to data allows companies to get a better understanding of their customers and make predictions with that data that help to grow their business. As these predictions become more and more accurate by having the ability of recording almost everything by a click in the digital world, or recording every step with a sensor in the physical world, companies keep increasing their power. And the European Parliament decided that this increased power touches the privacy rights of the European citizens, and that it needs rules to regulate the treatment of personal data. So what is personal data actually? Personal data is basically everything that can be traced back to a human being. It can be categorized, for example, in categories like health data, political opinion, contact details, financial data, or religious beliefs. And you will realize quickly that this can be quite a lot of data fields if you break it down even further. Here you see a personal data set we gathered for an MM1 project that Dominic just described. Note that IP address, the session start and end, as well as the data volume used, can belong to the personal data set as well. The important thing to understand is that the EU assigns the ownership of the personal data that you see here to the specific individual, to the EU citizen. And if companies want to process the data, and processing is a broad term that also includes gathering and storing the data as well, you have to have a proven permission from the individual. This is the fundamental concept behind this regulation, which is giving each individual the right to control its personal data. It is very useful to have someone in your corporation or organization who takes care that your users are constantly in control of their data. This is usually the data protection officer, or short DPO. One of the tasks that person has to do is to educate the entire team and make them aware of this fundamental assumption of that regulation. Your DPO will help you describe the purpose why your product or service needs to process personal data. This needs to be properly presented to your user, and they have to agree on it. The GDPR does not allow to process personal data unless you have that valid user consent. And your team should act according to these fundamental aspects when developing your digital service. In our projects, people keep frequently asking us to what extent the sentence is valid. And we experience discussions on that issue during our daily operations. We usually explain it by giving a very simple example. So imagine you are an e-commerce web shop and you sell shoes via the internet. You do not need a permission for the data that you need to conduct a shoe sale. Yeah? But for all additional processes beyond the shoe sale. So to conduct the shoe sale end to end, it is essential to have the shipping address. And you also need to know the payment method your customer prefers. You also need to know the size of the shoes your customer bought in order to send him the right pair. This is all part of the so-called core service, and you do not need a consent for storing these personal data until your core service is finished. Your core service would probably end when your customer confirmed that he or she received the shoes and wants to keep them. However, nowadays, almost all companies conduct additional analytics and marketing initiatives with user data and have an interest to store and analyze personal data for a longer period. And if you want to know on which pictures your customer clicked and how much time the customer spent on your website, you need a consent to store the data, since it is not necessary information for the shoe sale. If you want to keep the email address in your system in order to send a marketing newsletter, you will need a consent. And if you want to store the IP address to target recurring customers with personalized ads, you need a consent. Or if you want to put all your customers' shipping addresses on a map in order to analyze where they're coming from, you will also need a consent. So I think this is the basic concept your team should understand. All additional service need that consent. You are obliged to describe all these analysis you would like to do in a privacy statement and make it accessible to your users before you even begin collecting the data. The user of your service is supposed to have the opportunity to understand what you do with his or her data and has actively agree on it. Only with a given user consent, you can start your analytics. For the development team that we have been part of, this means that while we are moving forward on our learning curve and the team realizes that we would like to analyze something else with the existing user data in our system, we will also need to update the consent and ask our users for permission again if the analysis is not covered by the existing privacy statement. This procedure is supposed to enable the user that he or she is always in control of the data and can verify that what we do with the personal data. We have the duty to inform the user about the actions we undertake in the privacy statement. This is an important aspect every team should understand before they conduct their analysis. The GDPR is bridging this strict requirement to daily operations by introducing two new terms, privacy by design and privacy by default. Both terms can be understood as a call to action to companies, how they should develop their digital services. Privacy by design means that you integrate data privacy in your value chain while you draft, design, and develop your product features. Nowadays, almost all software development teams work in an agile and project management setup. They have a product backlog, and think in user stories that are passed from one expert to another. What we recommend is that even in this early process, you integrate the DPO or another legal advisor who checks the impact that new feature might have. This is supposed to assure that you minimize data gathering and only gather the data you really need for that specific new feature. So integrate legal experts and make them work together with your development teams. Here you see an example of how this could look like. You see a sample process that we usually apply in our projects. It shows the different development steps and starts at a new feature idea that is written as a user story and moves through the different phases until it gets released to the user. We make the first GDPR review when we developed a solution design that was accepted by the IT team. And we make another review when the feature is implemented but not yet published. Once you release the new feature to your users, you might want to give them the opportunity to change the default settings. In advance, you will define and set the default settings, and this is where privacy by default comes into place. The GDPR requires you to set the default settings in such a way that you minimize the data gathering to that extent that you only process data that is necessary for the specific feature. A good example that illustrates privacy by default are cookie banners that you might know from visiting a website nowadays. If you don't want to accept the cookies, you have the option to open up a menu with a list of tracking options that you can configure. The GDPR requires all websites to set these settings in such a way that you opt out for all additional tracking mechanisms. And that is exactly the same thing you should do for your new product feature. So moving to the next chapter, let's say you have your purpose and well-defined, and you have your user consent. The user has given you the right to process personal data, and you start processing the data and create value with it. That means you have the personal data now in your system. And what the regulation asks you is to establish processes that assure that the personal data is safe inside your system. You are required to document the process and present it to the public authorities upon request. The processes you set up should always match your specific needs regarding your organization, your teams, and your product. But here are a few examples what you can do or what everyone could actually do. First, pseudonymize data. Pseudonymizing data means that you start that your data set cannot be traced back to the individual anymore you gathered the data from without having a specific key. A key can be an ID or a code that replaces the username or the email address, for example. The real data is hidden for everyone without the key. Second, encrypt personal data. This is highly advised for transferring and storing personal data. If someone gets unallowed access to the data, he or she just sees encrypted text. Make use of VPNs and firewalls. Firewalls protect your IT system from external access requests based on a set of network rules. And VPNs, virtual private networks, avoid attacks on your network communication. So, for example, when your colleagues communicate with each other from their home offices. Criminals who successfully get access to that communication can only see encrypted text when a VPN is installed. And if you want to use cloud-based services, you should only access them via encrypted protocols such as HTTPS or SFTP. Moreover, assure that your email communication is encrypted via a valid certificate. Establish access controls for physical servers and assign credentials only to employees who need to access the personal data. Make sure that only selected people have keycards and personal pins to the server rooms. Make sure to redo these access permissions again when a team member leaves your company. And hand out only personalized permission rights and avoid sharing of credentials. We advise you to log user activity in your system and analyze unusual patterns. Make sure that the data can be recovered in case of a system failure, so make use of backups, and assure yourself against an uninterrupted energy supply for your servers. Conduct yearly reviews, make a yearly revision of your IT security concept, and update your risk assessment. And let a DPO check whether defined processes are still in place. And last but not least, train your people. Make sure that your team participates frequently in GDPR trainings. So let's move on to the privacy shield and the cross-border data transfer. You might have heard about the so-called privacy shield. This was an agreement on how to deal with data transfers between the European Union and the United States. This agreement regulated the protection of personal data from European citizens on servers that are hosted on US territory. And last year, the European Court of Justice decided that this agreement is not valid anymore, since the US Secret Service can potentially access this personal user data of EU citizens. So how can data that was gathered in Europe be transferred across borders? I will give you two answers on that, a simple one and a difficult one. The simple answer is, according to the GDPR, you're only allowed to transfer data within the European Union. So meaning that you only use servers within the EU territory. Moreover, the EU confirmed that a set of countries have enough protective regulation in their laws established that data transfers can be done on their territory as well. Among them are Argentina, Canada, New Zealand, Switzerland, Uruguay, and Japan. For all other countries, including China and the United States, there are strong restrictions. So here is the difficult answer. If you want to transfer data abroad outside the EU and remain GDPR compliant, you have basically two options that would lead to a lot of work for your lawyers. First is, you agree on strict privacy regulations with your non-EU contract partner. This also accounts for intercompany agreements. So when your mother company is, for example, placed in China, this agreement has to be approved by a European Public Data Privacy Authority. And second, you explain the individual, so the user, the EU citizen, why and how you process the data abroad and that potential risks might occur. Those are the options you have, but to be honest, both alternatives have a low likelihood of success. Even worse, many companies currently do use US and Chinese tools and transfer data abroad involuntarily just by using these tools. And these companies have, again, two options. They either change their entire operative IT infrastructure or remain incompliant. To tell you the unattractive truth, this is something you have to weigh up. The EU is currently working together with industry partners on a GDPR compliant cloud infrastructure. This solution is already implemented and approximately 300 companies in Europe are using it. However, none of these 300 companies is a big player with a large IT system, so it's still an experimental environment. Nevertheless, we would like to give you a recommendation today, how you might proceed in case you are aware that your company sends personal data outside the EU. First, you should be aware of your data transfers. So we recommend to determine all processes in which personal data from EU citizens is directly or indirectly sent outside the EU. Note that this list also includes company tools that process personal data of your European employees. Yeah? It is likely that you identify tools and processes that you deem to be as not important for you. So you can use this approach to clean up and standardize some of your internal processes as well. And then you will identify the must-have processes. You should go into an analysis whether you can increase the data protection with additional security initiatives. For example, you start encrypting the data and make sure that the private key for the decryption is only stored at the European user device. To sum it up, international data transfers are the most legal issues that almost all European companies need to deal with. Once the European cloud solution is in place, Europe might become a digital island in the world. The European data autarky is something many politicians want to establish. All right. We talked about the penalties already in the beginning. And for severe violations against the regulation, fines can be set up to 20 million euro or 4% of the global revenue of the corporation, whatever value is higher. There's a long list of companies that have been fined within the last 2 years, and I would like to set a highlight on 3 examples. H&M is a Swedish fashion label that has been fined with the highest fee in Germany. The company implemented a process in which every employee was obliged to have a one-on-one meeting after he or she returned from vacation or sick leave. They were asked about the reasons for their absence and what they had experienced specifically. This information had been documented and was available for a set of team leads at H&M. And due to a technical error, the documentation was also available to the entire company for a short while. Once this became public, H&M was fined with 35 million euros, a tremendous sum. But even worse than the fine was the upcoming danger of a loss of reputation for H&M. Reputation as a consumer brand as well as an employer brand, which would have harmed them even more in the future. That is why their strategy was to avoid media attention and leave this fine behind as fast as possible. They officially apologized at the respective employees, stopped the internal processes that led to the fine, and paid the fee. The second example is supposed to demonstrate that sometimes companies fight successfully on court for a fee reduction. The customer service of the telco company 1&1 released information to people who called a hotline and only authenticated themselves with name and date of birth. For a correct authentication, they should have also asked for a contract number or a customer ID to avoid that contract-related details are given out to random people. The GDPR fines are categorized by the degrees of severity of the violation. And initially, the violation was evaluated as very, very severe. And the authorities set a fine of 10 million euros to 1&1. But 1&1 went to court and was able to reduce the fine to 1 million euro by arguing or collecting arguments that this failure should only be considered as a moderate violation. So they were successful in reducing the fine. The third example comes from the social media network Knoodles. They have been a victim of a cyber attack. And the hackers were able to publish a list of usernames and passwords since Knoodles did not encrypt these data on their servers properly. And the authorities fined that lack of IT security with 20,000 euros. The company obviously missed to protect the personal data they collected from their users. If you like, share this link on the bottom with your DPO team. There you can simulate a potential GDPR fine based on the type of violation and severity that you might want to simulate. Of course, our recommendation is to take the respective data protection initiatives inside your company to avoid such situations that happen to H&M, 1&1, and Knoodles. Nevertheless, we also recommend you to be prepared when you experience such a data breach that happens to Knoodles, for example. And this is the last part. for today. And this is actually something you can put out of your drawer when you experience such a data breach. Based on the current level of IT security that we experience in average companies today, there is a certain likelihood that companies become a victim of a ransomware attack, or there's just human failure that leads to a data breach. Newest example, it was in the news yesterday that another that there are about 300,000 ransomware attacks globally within one day only. Yeah. It does not always have to have a cyber attack that requires you to become active. A data breach can also occur when someone in your team sends personal data in a file to a wrong email address, or if a large marketing email is sent out that does not hide the other recipients. When you experience a data breach, you have to report it within 72 hours to the respective authority. In such a case, you have to react very fast, and it is highly recommended to design an emergency plan for these situations. And the plan could, for example, look like this. First, the data breach has been reported to the project lead. Then the project lead aligns with the DPO and conducts a risk assessment whether personal rights are violated. The DPO calls in a predefined emergency task force, for example, consisting of the involved IT department, an IT lawyer, and the public relations department. And that task force defines immediate initiatives. For example, a public statement or the resetting of all user passwords in your systems. Then, in the last step, the task force reports the information on the data breach, including their immediate initiatives to the authorities. And if there is a high likelihood that personal rights have been violated, the company also has to inform their users. So when you hear in the news, like yesterday, that there has been a data breach somewhere, you will get probably aware of it due to this required process that you see here. And with these words, I would like to close this short presentation on the GDPR. I hope you got an impression how the GDPR can impact your operations and your digital products. If you want to minimize the personal data and you need to process, and if you have a strong IT security in place to protect that data, and if you are prepared for the worst case scenario that you see here, then you're probably on a good way to fully comply to the GDPR. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian, for your sharing. I think it's really a very informative knowledge, and yeah, it's just like the top of the iceberg about this GDPR things we have been facing and will be facing more and more in the future. So thank you again, and I think now we have the time for questions in the audience. So if you have any question, please feel free just to unmute yourself and yeah, just ask your questions to the speakers today.
I like the comment from the Ergo Insurance. It's probably a well-selling product, I assume. Who wrote this? It was a direct message to me. Okay, I see here. Is there someone from Ergo in this place, in the call? Nancy. You mentioned that you sell cybersecurity insurances, if I understand correctly. Oh, okay, right. Can you tell us something how this product is selling? Like, are many companies want to have that insurance? Yes, you're muted. Okay, I'm not sure whether you guys can read Nancy's answer.
I'm afraid not, at least from my side, okay. No. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, perhaps she offered to share some material. Yeah, I mean, having an insurance against cybersecurity is something that we would recommend, since we experience that quite often for companies nowadays. And yeah, what would be the golden nugget to find is that European cloud solution. There, the vision is that all these services that we use nowadays can be used GDPR compliant in the future. So the project is called Gaia X and has been highly supported by the French and the German government. And it's now in place, it's used, and it's worth to experiment with it. However, yeah, you should be aware of it, that it's probably too risky to move with all your processes on that cloud solution, since no big player has done it so far. But this is an additional recommendation that someone in your team should be aware of the development of Gaia X.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Are there more questions? And also to the Dominic and Volker who shared their parts earlier. Because this chart, I think you need to choose who you send this message to. So if not, I would also, not wasting more time of you guys, to conclude this speech today, I would like to thank you again, everyone, for your attendance and your time. And we'll be very happy if you can keep in contact and follow us from our website. We have a Chinese website, and of course in English and German as well. And also we have a WeChat account, so you can get in contact there and also follow up with the news of MM1 in Chinese. And thank you again for Chinese Handelskammer, for the CHKD, for your support and this nice platform you provided. And also thank you very much to the teams here. Thank you for the preparation and sharing the insight. And yeah, if you guys want to know more and want to contact to have a deeper exchange, we will be very happy to be contacted through the WeChat and also the email and telephone number we listed here. Having that said, we wish you a very nice day and early nice weekend as well. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. 谢谢。
谢谢大家。